that is magnificent. Like, that is so engaging, and the character turns and the moments of revelation and the tensions that are cultivated in some of those episodes were really, really spectacular. That's one that sticks with me of relatively recent viewing that I took a lot from.
How do you write a scene?
When I was first starting screenwriting, I used to be very linear. I used to, where do we enter the scene? Who's in it? What do they start to say? And let it kind of build through time in a very literal, very linear way. I've departed from that, and I think it's for the best, at least in my process, where what I end up doing in sketching scenes, and I think it makes the process less daunting and more like allow yourself to sketch, and it doesn't have to be perfect on your first write through, but I know where there's pieces of dialogue that have to happen, that have to advance the story. If a conflict has to erupt in this circumstance, what is being said or being done that allows for that conflict to arise? And sometimes there's, early bits of dialogue that I know I really want this person to say in this circumstance, but I don't have the build in yet, or I might just know how a scene ends. What is the end point? If these people are going to go their separate ways at the end of this scene, why don't I kind of start there and then backfill it? And what I end up doing a lot more now that frees up the threat of the perfectionist stepping in, which is often very antithetical to working with pace and working fluidly, because you want it to be perfect, right? First writing of this scene, everybody's got to say everything perfectly, and it's just got to be this, Oscar-worthy thing. It never is. So what I find is if I can get down like some of the core pieces, and sometimes even when I outline, I'll have bits that just come to me extemporaneously when I'm outlining, and I'll just jot them down, and often I outline by hand, which is really kind of an archaic method, but I find I do, because I have to get into kind of like a quiet place, and if I'm on the computer, then an email or a phone call comes in, I get distracted. If I can just put on some headphones, zone out with some music that's right for the story, I just work from either note cards or like a little moleskin notebook, and sometimes I'll jot down bits of dialogue or the spirit of what the dialogue needs to be. It doesn't have to be the exact wording that's ultimately going to be in the polished draft of the script. But if someone needs to say, "If you, I'm leaving," that's probably not the best way to deliver that line. We're probably something better, but at least, the spirit of what's being expressed can be there, and then you can go in and refine the texture of what the character would really say. So I think to me, I think the more you can just kind of get the spirit of what the scene needs to be down, then you can sit with the refinement and go into it and really, keep coming at with finer and finer chisels until you ultimately get what you want.
Do you spend several hours a day writing, or do you find you're better sort of in like short segments?
When I'm writing something, I always work in the morning, when I'm first awake with my coffee. That is always my zen, most imaginatively valuable time, because I don't have anything in the day sitting on me yet. I don't have any inevitable distractions or other life pressures that have crept in, and I can just be inside of the story space and then let the day start, and I tend to, when I am writing something, I'll get up pretty early so I can have, pre-business hours, no phones ringing, no emails starting to fly in that need time-sensitive responses and things like that, and you can just be in the work for a bit. So, normally I like to carve out about 3 hours every day when I'm writing, and even if I get a handful of decent stuff down, it's the repetition of the act of coming to it at the same time, same expected sit down hours, and I look forward to it. I look forward to that time, to be honest with you, when I'm not writing something. I'm not currently writing something now, and I miss it, but I just don't. I'm just not writing something right now. But I miss those. I miss those morning hours with my coffee and the first bird chirping in the early light of the day. It's just a peaceful, nice piece of the day to work. So that's my process. I know people who love to be up kind of for the same reasons late at night. Like, for instance, my wife is a night owl. She does her best work at 2 in the morning when I'm long gone. I'm long conked out by then nowadays. But different biorhythms, when the imagination stirs and when whatever, whatever is your best time to pull it in, then try to pinch that time off to be sacred for yourself, because I think the more you can do that, not just try to come at it at random snips and little dribs and drabs of time. I mean, some people might work great like that. I don't know. I've never been like kind of a coffee house writer either, where I can go sit in public and hear like clinking plates and people talking around me and like get inspired. I'm like so distracted that I couldn't begin to get anything done. So I need quiet headphones. Ordinarily, no communication devices on if I can get away with it, like literally phone off, airplane mode. I love that. I think that's sacred.
When you're writing, how do you know if a scene is working or not?
That's a great question, and it's tricky. I think I know if I'm like breathing heavily, which normally my work I tend to do is often relatively intense. So if I'm writing, an intense scene, if I'm very engaged with it personally, if my like biology is engaging with it, then I feel like it's working. And sometimes, I'll often actually like sort of under my breath speak the lines as I'm reading through it, and to sort of like murmur the lines and just kind of hear them in the mouth a bit. And I get teased by my wife teases me when she hears me from another room when I am doing that. And she'll sometimes whisper and be like, "You're breathing." It's like, I can hear you breathing in the other room, like you're like gasping. I'm like, that's great, because this is cooking. Then this one's working, because if you get your like sort of nervous system plugged into it, then that's what you want the audience to take out of it on the other end, right? They want them to be feeling it in a very visceral way. So when it's more of a if it's a expositional scene or a setup scene, or it's something a little bit more dry where you gotta get this information out somehow to explain what happens next, that could be a little trickier, because those nuances aren't quite as engaging, and you kind of just have to get a collaborative input. If it's like, does this scene work? Do we even need it? Is it getting the job done? Could we spice it up? Do we need to take it down? I mean, those types of scenes are a little bit more open to, once you start kind of bringing people in to give you notes and so forth. But if it's like a climactic, or it's an act break scene, or it's a revelation scene, or a piece of new information gets brought out that's unexpected, and you want people to be like, if you could like feel your nervous system engaging with it, then I think you're onto something. If you're breathing, if your palms are getting sweaty or something, I mean, I've caught myself a number of times when I'm working on a scene where I'm just like I gotta keep putting on chapstick, and I'm like biting my own lips, like doing the lines and stuff, and then I know, all right, something's working here,
Right. Is there a movie that's done that recently for you, or watching it you kind of lose track of time, and you're in such a sort of a state that's mirroring the scene?
Well, I think a really good thriller or horror movie does that, because it's meant to play upon your senses in that kind of very visceral, almost brainstem kind of impact. I can't think of one I've seen that terribly recently. You know, interestingly enough, it's so after the fact, but last summer, I had never, for whatever reason, I never saw it when it was out and zeitgeisty, and I watched the entirety of Breaking Bad from top to bottom, and I was so late to the party. I mean, I was the same thing with Game of Thrones, which I still really have never seen, but Breaking Bad, I was like, all right, this is canonical. Everybody says it's like the greatest television show that's ever been made, dramatically and so intense and this and that. And I watched that just rabidly from top to bottom, and there were episodes of that where I was like, that is magnificent. Like, that is so engaging, and the character turns and the moments of revelation and the tensions that are cultivated in some of those episodes were really, really spectacular. That's one that sticks with me of relatively recent viewing that I took a lot from in inspiration.
Yeah, it's always interesting to go back to something that had such an amazing reach at like, 5 years prior, and then kind of like say, okay, I'm going to sit down and watch it. And it's an interesting feeling to think, wow, I missed all that, and now I know what everyone was talking about.
Well, it's kind of like watching a sports game like on a rerun. No one does that much. It's like you need the sports game to be in the immediacy of it happening, because the whole stakes are like, who's going to win? What's happening? Who's going to win and lose this thing? I do know people who are very into sports that go back and watch like older games of things that were like just spectacular games. But I think when there's something that's happening in the zeitgeist, when a show is really big like Breaking Bad was, or a movie that's out now like Weapons that's turning so many heads right now, there's an intoxicating aspect of being part of that sort of commonality of viewership, where you're sharing in this in the moment experience. But there's also something kind of liberating about not being beholden to having your hot take on this thing of the moment and coming at it. Breaking Bad's like 15 years old now, something like that, from the opening seasons, and just being like, oh, I watch this thing, I don't have to tell anybody I'm watching it, I'm just going to take it in on its own terms, and that could be a very great kind of analytical way to also, as a filmmaker, watch a piece without feeling like you're beholden to how other people are interpreting it or what the reviews are saying, while it's out. You just kind of take it on its own merit. And that was a great experience to do that with that show.
Do you let reviews dictate what you watch?
Less and less, because I think so often I'll watch something that got slammed and I'll love it. And so often, especially as a student of film history, you can look, it's very interesting to go back and read, since a lot of them are collated on things like Rotten Tomatoes now, the reviews of movies that have become undeniable classic totem poles of the medium now, that were just torn to ribbons when they came out. The critics, slammed them. And even audiences were like, nope, moving on. And now, we've caught up with some of movies. There's many movies like that really, like, I don't know if they were ahead of their time, but they didn't get the interpretation at their time that piece merits, or they've grown into themselves somehow. And nowadays, where reviewers have, let's say, not always a neutral agenda. Sometimes it's to play devil's advocate because other reviews are saying this and they want to say something contrarian to sort of step out into their own limelight as someone who has a different take. There's all kinds of imperatives as to why someone writes what they do in reaction to a given piece. And unless you, for whatever reason, tracking their critique, feel such an affinity with a particular reviewer's sensibility, then that's one thing. If there's someone like you, every time you line up with them, like, I like what they like, I don't like what they don't like, I should just, see what someone like that is saying about a piece. There's some merit in that, because no one wants to waste their time and just watch something that totally just insults your sensibilities for 2 hours or whatever it is, and you're just like, I can't get that time back. But I think personally, I feel like you can watch the first 5 minutes of something and know if you're into it or not. The style, the feel, the way it's articulated. You know early on, like, all right, I'm in. This is getting me. This is bringing me somewhere, or you don't. And then no shade to people who have spent God knows how long putting that piece of material into the world, but it's a subjective audience. You like what you like. So yeah, I've become a little bit more allergic to reviews because everybody can be a reviewer now. I mean, this is the pro and con of the internet, which is that everybody can have an opinion, which we're all certainly welcome to have. But it can be just too much. I mean, sometimes you just got to take something on your own subjectivity and see if it's for you or not, and go from there.
When you're writing and you can feel that a scene isn't working for you, what do you do?
I keep going because I feel like when you get stuck in a scene that you're going to have to go back and do some futzing to, it hurts the holistic process of what the writing experience, I believe, needs to be, which is you need to build the whole sort of dome under which the story is going to take place. And you're going to have some scenes early on that are just flat out bad, and some that even from first draft are like some version of that's going to be in the final script. And I think if you get too caught up in hyper working a scene, an individual scene early on, you miss the forest for the trees a bit. And the problem psychologically, I feel that I've had to be very, very merciless on myself to curb, is the perfectionist issue that all of us as creatives have some shade of, or some amount of, where there's this pressure we place on ourselves of the expectation of what this scene or individual bit needs to be, and that perfectionist aspect is kind of counter to the creative process, because it comes in full of judgment, and it comes in often full of scathing slander towards yourself. It's a very negative critic, and it's like, all right, this scene is not working, so the rest of the story is garbage, and I'm just going to move on to something else because this one little thing doesn't work. You can get it to work, but if you let that sort of negative cloud start to hang over your process, even though you have to be judicious and you have to be hard on yourself and you have to be, very honest and truthful about what is working and what isn't, and use your best judgment with that ultimately. I think it's a mistake to use it too forcefully early on, because I think that the first kind of flowing of the creative gesture is a holistic one. You want to get as much of it down sort of early on as you can, and then go back and refine. So dependent upon the stage of the process, if you're talking about, long in the offing where you're trying to make a scene and an otherwise pretty much finished script work, or refine it so that it meets the quality of everything that's around it, then I think you just keep coming at it. You just keep coming at it, but not to the point where you're like, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're just losing objectivity entirely, because that can happen too. But I think if you come at problematic scenes, maybe a little bit each day, it's only a matter of time until you kind of crack the code, or someone gives you some input or a note, and they're like, well, why don't you tell it from this person's perspective in the scene? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the person who's upset in the scene shouldn't have the lead. Maybe it's the person who's trying to calm them down that should be telling the POV of the scene. And then it's like, oh, light bulb, that's it. That's the cure. Whatever. But you just need to wait till that bit of awareness sets in. And I know writers, and I think it's more often at the earlier part of their career or their pursuit that they they're really hard on themselves to get scenes right before they move on, because they feel like for some reason, you know, if this domino isn't perfect, it's not going to hit the next one in the right way, and they're not all going to fall in the direction that I want the whole story to go. And to a plotting degree, I mean, you know, there is some truth to that, that something that happens on page 20 is going to influence something that happens on page 92. I mean, there is a linear causality in a script, so you have to be mindful of making sure that your plotting is tracking. But when a lot of that's done in the outline, you know, in my process, a lot of the plotting is in the outlining stage, so the scenes can be a little bit more allowed to sort of breathe a bit, to find them without worrying about, like, is the plot going to work? So yeah, I mean, I think coming at them in waves, I find is the most forgiving and effective way I try to do it.
Have you ever had an actor say to you, I mean, you've been precious about a story or a piece of dialogue or scene, and then the actor is just, I'm so sorry, I just don't think the character would do this.
Absolutely. And I always defer to them. I mean, unless there's a reason that I feel like they're not getting in the overall that I really defend something that's said. If they don't feel they can play it, and that doesn't feel authentic to where they're coming from in their character work, then I defer to them, because ultimately you're going to see that authenticity or lack thereof on the screen. So you want them to believe every bit of what they're saying, because you can tell if they don't, you know.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.